Welcome to the Thomas More Centre YouTube channel. In today's episode, Mark Merkievsky speaks with Bug Hall. Bug Hall is a former Hollywood actor turned farmer, and today they explore embracing poverty and Providence. We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did.
G'day everyone, my name is Mark Merkievsky and welcome to the Thomas More Centre channel. Today we're interviewing Bug Hall, whom many of you will know as Alfalfa from the Little Rascals movie. Some of you might also know that Bug has chosen to adopt a simpler life in recent years, where he focuses on faith, family, and farming. So welcome to the channel, Bug. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So just for a few people who might not be aware of who you are, if you could give us a bit of a background, like your childhood, how you got your name, your nickname, and a brief kind of story of your acting career and things like that.
Sure. Yeah, so I was born in Texas. I grew up there until I was 8 years old. And Steven Spielberg was casting for a movie called Little Rascals. So they had a big open call all around the United States. They wanted non-actors. So they just kind of had these big publicized auditions. The lines were like 4 hours long. And I don't remember how I heard about it. I think there was a flyer at my sister's dance class. And I grew up watching the old Little Rascals. My mom ran a daycare. And that's actually how I got my name. She used to lay me on the floor and she'd tell all the daycare kids, don't step on the little bug and squish them. And so Bug just kind of became my name. But so in the daycare, we had The Sound of Music and we had The Little Rascals. That's all we watched. So I knew Alfalfa and I knew I could do it. And I wanted to go. So I asked my mom if we could go, and that was it. So I went in, and after waiting for 4 hours, I think I was in there for like 1 minute, and they dismissed me. And then I said, well, hold on, can I sing you a song? And I launched into She'll Be Coming Around the Mountain, which was an old Alfalfa standard. And I did the voice and everything, and I guess that was captivating enough. And I got a call back, and 3 callbacks later, they were flying me to Los Angeles to meet Spielberg and all of that. So just a normal Texas kid, and then life changed.
Yeah, right. I looked up the original Little Rascals because I hadn't seen it myself, and I noticed that the casting or Spielberg's casting, you very much look similar to the original characters. So I think they must have taken a look at you, besides your acting talent, and thought he fits the bill. He's the right height and whatnot. So very good.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I went on to do quite a few kids movies after that. And I worked as an actor pretty consistently for, 20 something years. And then I began to write as well. So I was still acting, but I was also writing. And then I eventually started my own company and started film development. So I would basically kind of piece movies and TV projects together and then sell that off to the studios and the networks.
And you had some success in that as well, didn't you?
I did. Yeah. In fact, a couple years after I retired, I was nominated for an Emmy for the last show that I had developed for Netflix. So I wrote and developed and produced that one. And so, everyone thought I was crazy retiring with an Emmy nomination coming through, but usually people are aiming for that, and that's like the launching pad, but I had other things in mind. So
that's right. You got up to the mountain and you were ready to hit top of Everest, and then you just decided to parachute down. But
I looked around and I said, the weather's not looking too great these days. I'm going back into the valley.
Very good. So I guess one of the reasons I thought you'd be a great person to interview is because we're a kind of Christian, particularly Catholic channel as well. And there's a few people I know who are kind of looking to move to the land. And so faith and farming and those kind of things are very interesting to them. And so I thought I'd investigate this side of your life, your conversion, as well as your decision to move to the land and what that's kind of like. And it might be insightful for others who are considering that. So if I could just ask, well, we spoke earlier and you said you converted at a conference in 2013, and it was a psychology conference. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So my business partner, my writing partner, he had gone down to Mexico to do this movie called Little Boy. And while he was down there, he met a bunch of Catholic filmmakers, and he converted through some conferences that they would give sort of in the evenings, unofficial sort of stuff. And I didn't know anything about Christianity or really religion outside of what I had seen in movies. I was really, really read up on like silly Eastern stuff because I thought it was cool. But I mean, Christianity just seemed one note to me. I had no knowledge of it. So I thought he was crazy. But I wanted to be a supportive friend. I didn't want to just shoot him down. So I just kind of let him do his thing. And we never got into any arguments about it. But I was very much a, at least I would have claimed to be an atheist. I very much believed myself to be an atheist. And I didn't grow up with any kind of religion. So after about a year of him trying to live out his Catholic faith, it began to wear on our, we had been best friends for, 15 years or so, but our business relationship was struggling because there were suddenly moral equations that didn't match with my beliefs. Right. And I'm kind of going, well, this is a hindrance now. So now the combat needs to start. And so I had begun reading about the history of Catholicism a little bit, just looking for kind of ammunition, I guess, was the goal, right? All I got to do is show him the Inquisition and show him the Crusades and show him all these horrors and atrocities. Problem is, the more you dig into those things, the more you start to see that they were not horrors and atrocities. The Holy Inquisition was a beautiful thing. And it's still controversial to say that, but the Crusades were a beautiful thing. So that was kind of the first chink in the armor, I think, was the history I was expecting to uncover turned out to be the opposite. Mm-hmm. But that still wasn't enough. I still just kind of went about my life. And then he finally invited me to a psychology conference. He said, hey, I've got this psychology conference, and it's about vices and how they affect the human person, how they affect your psychology. And I was like, oh, that's cool. We had a project at the time about addiction and stuff. And so I said, yeah, that'd be really helpful. Let's go to that conference together. Well, he didn't tell me it was a Catholic priest. Right. So we get there and I walk in, and there's this Catholic priest standing there in a cassock, and I remember just kind of rolling my eyes, thinking, oh, this is just a religious thing. And so I sat through the first maybe 30 minutes, and I had my arms crossed, and I was making sure everyone knew I didn't want to be there. Mm-hmm. And it was at Eduardo Verastegui's house, who, he was an acquaintance. He was close friends with my business partner because he was one of the guys that had converted him. And I remember listening to this priest, and he was really well spoken and clearly very intelligent, but I was very much in my mind rejecting everything he was saying. Mm-hmm. And then he finally it was a conference on the 7 deadly sins, right? So he finally gets to a particular sin that was my predominant defect. And this priest is a Thomist. He's one of the preeminent Thomists in the world. He's phenomenal. And the problem with St. Thomas Aquinas, the problem with his writing on human nature is that it's so accurate. It's mm-hmm. so accurate that it feels personal. And so as he's working through the psychology of this particular sin and its effects on the human person, I actually believed for a moment that it was a setup. I believed for a moment that he was talking right to me, and that this whole thing had been set up as some sort of religious intervention. So I'm looking around the room now, trying to see who looks suspicious, what they did was they got this priest and they told him everything about me, and they told him, we're going to get bugged. That's really what I believed. But it was just because it was so accurate. So I confronted this priest on the balcony, and I just started leveling really bad atheist arguments, all the like juvenile 14-year-old edgelord arguments. And this priest just had no interest in it. He didn't have any interest in me, didn't have any interest in my stupid arguments. He just wanted to smoke his cigar in peace and get back to his work, right, of teaching this conference. And I commend him for that, because I think a lot of times people get really caught up into that apologetics mode, and they think that they really have to tackle combative arguments, right? When someone's sort of viciously attacking, the will is involved in learning, right? The will is involved in understanding. And he knew that. He knew that I wasn't interested in any arguments that he actually would have had. So he just dismissed me. Right, okay, sure. And the more he dismissed me, the more I realized he had no clue who I was. He wasn't there for me. I looked inside, everyone was, eating hors d'oeuvres and laughing together and talking. And I just, for the first time, I realized that this didn't have anything to do with me. So the particular grace, the actual grace that God gave me, was to realize for a moment that I was angry because it was true. That's why I was angry. And that was enough to kind of pull the rug out from under me. And I kind of stumbled in, just dumbstruck, I guess, and sat through the rest of the conference. When the priest came back in, I sat through another hour and a half. And at the end of that night, I confronted him again and asked him, how does someone become Catholic, and where does all this knowledge come from, and where'd you get all this stuff, because it's so true. And he said, well, it's just the perennial teaching of Holy Mother Church, and I wanted to know more. And so that was it. A few months later, I was baptized and received First Communion and received confirmation.
Right, yeah. Right, and so you stayed you stayed in Hollywood then. You didn't kind of pick up and leave then and there. You stayed in for a few more years and went on to get your Emmy-nominated programs and whatnot.
Right.
You met your wife in 2014. Was that while you were kind of pursuing your kind of your faith?
Well, yeah. So I, right when I converted, I moved out to the Mojave Desert. And I knew, because, I remember leaving the Abbey where I was baptized, Easter Vigil, we did the whole Triduum and everything. And then I remember the drive home, and I remember that while I had really crammed as much of the teaching of the church into my head as I could before baptism, and I was grilled by Father Abbott there, the practical reality of living a Christian life hadn't really dawned on me. It just hadn't really hit me how much of my life was incongruous with the moral theology of the church. And I guess I just kind of figured I'd white knuckle it. I'm just gonna, all these things that I've grown accustomed to doing, I'll just not do them. Well, we all know that that's not exactly the reality. And so I went out to the desert. It's really hard to sin in the desert. There's nothing, there's no reception for my phone. There's no TV. There's no communication with anybody. It was me and a cot and a stack of books. And I lived out there for 6 months. I would come into town just to get reception. Where I was staying in the desert was about 3 hours outside of Los Angeles. And so I would come just far enough in to get reception to see if I had any important appointments. And if I had appointments, I would go to my appointments and then go right back to the desert. And so that was it. And I'd go in for, go up to the Abbey for Mass and things like that. But there was also a cloister out there of nuns about 40 minutes from where I was staying. And so I would go help them during the day, just help them bale hay and dig trenches and do whatever they needed to be done. So, and then after that 6 months, I went home to Texas for about a year, and I worked on a ranch with my brother. I had this big grandiose idea that I was going to convert my brother and convert my family, and that's that
I've seen it a few times.
young zeal, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, I'm going home. I'm converting the family. My brother was a first degree separationist, fundamentalist, independent Baptist youth minister. And so I got a job with him on the ranch that he worked at. And it was a great time. Me and him argued a lot. And that was really when the iron was sharpened in terms of apologetics. That year, I think I learned more apologetics in that year than most people learn in their lifetime. And then my business partner called me, and he was like, "Hey, we got the funding for the company, and we're starting up on a bigger level, and we need you to come and run development." I said, "Okay." And 2 days after I got there, it was Eduardo Verastiquez's birthday, and they were having.
Just for the Australian audience who don't know who he is, you might just tell us who he is, and then go on with the story.
I think he's running for president of Mexico right now, but he's a very prominent South American, Central American Catholic. So he produced Bella and Little Boy. He produced a movie called Sound of Freedom, which has done really well recently. So it was his birthday, and they were having a philosophy conference for his birthday. And I had just gotten back in town after being gone for a year. And I remember kind of sitting there, and the people are asking questions and stuff. And this young woman raised her hand, and I hadn't seen her before. And so I asked my buddy, I said, "Hey, who's that? Is she new, in the group?" And he said, "No, actually, I don't know her either. She just showed up tonight. I guess she's a friend of a friend or whatever." And I looked at him, I said, "I'm going to marry her." And I did. That was it took a while, but so she had grown up Catholic, my wife, and sort of nominal Catholic, kind of Christmas and Easter Catholics. And she had gone out to LA originally to be an actress, and then she found herself working in an old folks home, taking care of patients with Alzheimer's. And her and her roommate had just on their own decided that they needed to go back to church. Like LA's enough of this. We need to go back to church. And if you walk around LA, you try to figure out where to go to church. Where do you go? You end up going to like the crazy Justin Bieber place, where it's all, all crazy. So I talked to her afterwards, and we put a stop to that. I said, "You were raised Catholic. You got to start going to mass again. You got to get to confession."
All right. Okay. So you sort of heard that.
That's right. So, well, I would say unfortunately, but I guess it's good. She took her faith very seriously, very quickly, and so much so that after we courted for about 5 months, I guess, I was going to propose to her. And I said, "I got something really important I want to talk to you about." And she said, "I got something important to talk to you about too." I said, "Okay, you first." She said, "Well, I think I'm called to be a nun." And I said, "Oh, oh." It's kind of one of those moments where, so what did you want to talk about? Nothing. So I put her in the car, and I drove her out to Tehachapi, out in the desert, the nuns that I knew out there. And I just dropped her off at the cloister out there and said, "Okay, see ya." I also, over those few months, she had really grown close with my friend group, who were all Catholics, and those were her only Catholic friends in LA. It was a strong support system. And so I just kind of made the decision. I didn't think me being around would help her discernment. I didn't think that was appropriate. So I went back to Texas because I also didn't think that she should not have access to the friend group, right? And so I was like, all right, you need this, and so I went back, and I was kind of working remotely. I was traveling a lot. I had a bunch of projects all over the country at the time. And 9 months later, funny fact is, I had started praying to Saints Louis and Zélie Martin, and so did she, and we weren't communicating for 9 months at all. So 9 months goes by, and I was in Vermont, and I was working on a project. I was in the writer's room with a bunch of guys, and we were hammering out this story, working on a project. And I get a phone call, and it says, Jill. And I said, oh, guys, like, I really got to take this. I'm so sorry. I walk out onto this, beautiful veranda, and I'm, hello. She says, hi, it's Jill. I said, okay. I said, how you doing? She said, well, I just thought it was fair that I should call you and let you know that I've discerned I'm called to the married life. And keep in mind, she has no idea where I am. She's just calling me, And I said, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. And I walked inside, and I said, guys, I have to go to the airport and get on a plane right now. Good luck. Sort it out. Figure it out. You've got enough to run on.
Mm-hmm.
And I had one of them drive me to the airport, and got back to LA, and we picked up where we left off. And then I took her up to Santa Barbara and proposed, I think, a couple months later. So, yeah, she's a good one. She's
right.
she'll forever be my big fish story. I caught a big fish, and
it's a good
I'm
one.
proud of that.
And it's such a Catholic thing to have the tension between married and religious life being made up by people. So it can be interesting. Okay, so you stayed in Hollywood you got married 2017, is that correct?
2017. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so you were married and you stayed in Hollywood for a while longer, but you've said in other videos that you kind of were growing a bit disillusioned with the scene. Do you want to just tell us briefly about that?
Well, yeah, I was growing disillusioned with my belief system. So my belief system at the time was very much this idea that, your religious beliefs can stay private. And, God has put you wherever he's put you. And so if you have to stay silent in order to accomplish things, and to accomplish success, so long as you aren't necessarily going contrary to morals, that silence can really benefit you, and can be a good thing, especially because you can go and do bigger things, right? So my idea was, we're running this sort of Trojan horse company, right? We're essentially infiltrating Hollywood. And this was the whole company. Everyone was on board with this idea. Like, we're never going to express the fact that we're Catholic. Never going to talk about any of that. No one should know that we're religious in any way, because it's really hostile in LA, right? Mm-hmm. Like you won't get meetings if you're a Christian. You're unless you're already an A-lister, you're not getting meetings.
Yeah.
And so we all had this sort of Trojan horse idea, and the problem is, over time, we kept thinking we were going to make these morally great projects that had strong Catholic values, right? But subtle. The problem is the financiers, the distributors, the networks, the studios. Once you sell something off to them, you don't have any control over it. Even if they hire you to continue producing the project, you're going to lose every moral battle. Even if I would always try to find non-moral ways to argue moral arguments. I try to come up with sort of creative reasons for why we should do X, Y, or Z and not do, whatever else. And it just doesn't really work. Sometimes it would, but sometimes it wouldn't. So now you have this fly in the soup problem. You got this project across the finish line. It's finished. It was meant to inspire people and elevate people and do good. And at the end of the day, it really doesn't. It's really just a hodgepodge of crummy secular values. And then what little Catholic values were there are so confused and so muddled that they don't really make sense anymore.
Okay.
And then
So,
you layer on top of that all along the way there are moral compromises.
mhm,
You have a producer coming on board who um, expresses very, very clearly that she plans on donating a large portion of her money to Planned Parenthood, right?
mhm,
But the network insists, or we think it's going to help sell the project. And so, you go, well, technically, we don't have any control over what people do with their money,
mhm.
right? So you make these little compromises. Um, and I often refer to it as the death of the soul by a million paper cuts.
Right.
Um, I was going to daily mass, and we were getting pretty good at the daily rosary, um, but I was really struggling. Um, you know, my faith was I wasn't guarding it and protecting it the way I was called to,
Mhm.
and that disillusionment finally kind of hit home in a very unfortunate way. I had relapsed, and that was a big wake up call. The priest that converted me had been my spiritual director after that for uh, quite a few years,
Mhm.
and it was just one of those things where I was like, well, something's going on because people don't just relapse. They're on top of the world and they're successful, and
Mhm.
you're going to something's wrong. And it was once I dug down and realized that I was lying to myself, right? And I was resentful about the fact that I was lying to myself. Um, and I just don't. Uh, I didn't believe that I was going to get to heaven that way.
Mhm.
And I think that was the crux of it. The crux of it was deep down. Um, it wasn't hard to see clearly that those compromises were only going to grow,
Mhm.
and the larger the stakes became, the bigger the projects became, and the more people who relied on me for their livelihoods, and the more people who relied on me to not say X, Y, or Z about moral truths. Um, that's a heavy weight,
Mhm.
and the compromises were going to drag me right down for sure. So
Yeah, we see that around us, especially in politics. It seems people go in with very good intentions, and they convince themselves that they can compromise and compromise and compromise, and then by the end you wonder, their ideals are kind of, yeah, destroyed. It seems, but
it's the greatest lie, and I'll tell you, it's so it's so sneaky. Here's the lie, and everybody does this. Not everybody, but a lot of people do this.
mhm,
They say, well, if I can just skirt by, right, in this corrupt system that's against my principles, if I can just skirt by until I reach X level,
mhm,
right? And you make up a level in your mind. You say, once I'm Mark Wahlberg, right, and when I'm at that level, then I can come out guns blazing, and I can, rosaries blazing, whatever, and I can say what I really mean, and I can hold people to task, and I can keep the moral principles, tight and firm. Here's the problem. That's the exact opposite of the truth, because the bigger the stakes get, the harder it is,
mhm,
right? And the easier it is to lie to yourself, right? And that's what we do. I mean, we do it all the time. We do it with small things. You think you're not going to do it when there's, a $60 million project on the table,
right,
and literally 400 people who don't get to feed their families
mm,
because you refuse, to take money from so and so, or to put this or that in the project or whatever, right? Um, and that was really always it for me, because I was never a money guy. I don't care. I never really cared about
mhm,
money. But the idea of changing the world, right? The idea that I could reach a level where I could change the world.
mhm,
Um, and then you have all these people who they rely on, and all their eggs are in that basket. They've got no skill sets except for, writing scripts or something.
mhm.
And they thought they found a little ark, a little safe place where they can be Christian, and quietly go along. And then you have to be the one that tells them, well, we torpedoed the project because so and so wanted to do X, Y, or Z, and right, like that's a hard thing to have to tell sometimes 100 people.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so you left Hollywood, and I believe at about this time, did you spend some time with a priest doing exorcisms? Is that about right?
Yeah, well, so I spent about 5 months just trying to figure out what I was going to do next.
Mm-hmm.
And I shifted right into the very normal mindset of, well, I just need to find another career. I don't really care what it is. I just need to provide for my family. I don't want anything fancy. I've lived a long, fancy life. I don't need any more fancy anything.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, I was looking at a company that builds playgrounds. And I was like, I love playgrounds. Like, I totally would love to be, someone that builds playgrounds. Like, that's
Uh-huh.
awesome.
Yeah.
And I was looking at another company that I don't remember. I don't even remember now. And I was just thinking about it. And I was talking to this priest who's an exorcist. The priest that converted me is an exorcist. And so I ended up knowing other exorcists through him. And this priest had been our chaplain on one of the movies that we did, a movie we did with Selena Gomez. And anytime we would do a movie or whatever, we would have a priest, kind of come out to the set and say mass for us kind of privately, and just kind of hang around, right? So I had become friends with this guy, and I was talking to him, and he said, well, sounds like you just need to talk through things and figure out what's going on and figure out what you're going to do and get your head straightened out. He said, why don't you come out and help me? Or he said, why don't you come out and we can talk? And I said, okay. And so he lived about, I think, 4 or 5 hours. So I'm driving out to his place, and I called him. I said, okay, I'm on my way. He said, okay, great. He said, well, I've got work all this week, so you can just stay with me and you can help me with my work. And then in the evening times, we'll have some time to sit and talk each evening. I said, oh, okay, I'll help you with your work. Okay. And so we get there, and he's an exorcist. So for a week straight, I mean, he's the diocesan exorcist, so it's a full booked schedule, 4 exorcisms a day, just boom, 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 one after the other. And it was interesting because I had heard all the stories a million times. I mean, all my spiritual director was an exorcist. I've heard them so plainly, and you just kind of take for granted, like, yeah, okay, yeah, sure, yeah, of course. But you experientially you don't quite grasp it, I guess until you're there, and then it's kind of mind blowing, I guess at first, but then it gets really boring pretty quickly. You're just like on vomit duty, holding holding the basket or whatever.
All right.
But there was a through line throughout that week, something that through all the conversations I had about the demonic or whatever, it had never really been crystallized until I saw it in person. It was this idea that, so first of all, because a lot of people I probably don't even know how exorcisms work. It's basically torture and interrogation. Like, that's it. The
Of
priest,
the demon?
yeah,
Of the demon, you mean, not the person. Yeah.
of the demon. That's what the priest is there to do.
Uh-huh.
He's there to torture and interrogate, get the specific information that he needs in order to reconcile the person with God. That's it, right? It always comes down to some reconciliation. That's it. Any good exorcist will tell you that their main job is not liberation. They're not there to liberate the person from a demon. They're there to get the person to heaven, right? They're there to help in the sanctification process, to help in the reconciliation process, and through that, the demon, it's actually torturous for the demon to see that they are the instrument of this person's sanctification, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the key. That's what the exorcist would always say when it would kind of run dry and the torture and interrogation would start to slow down. The one trump card that the exorcist would always pull back out is, how does it feel to know that you're doing God's will right now? you are the means of this person's sanctification. You're getting them to heaven. That's what God wants, and that's what you're doing. And you don't have any choice in them.
Yeah.
And the demon would just lose their minds every time, right? No, screaming and tongues flailing and whatever else. And as I was driving home, that kept running through my mind. The idea that we're all going to face God, and we're already going to know, right? We're going to know as we stand before him whether we did his will in opposition to our own, right? Or whether we did his will and we conformed ourselves to it, right? Because God's the master of all history, right? So all things work to the good. Even the damned did God's will, right? In some sense, right? In the sense of his passive will, in the sense of of all of that, and it just struck me. I just want to conform myself to God's will. I don't want to be standing there looking at God and realizing that I had allowed any corner of my soul to remain an enemy. I don't want that horror,
Yeah.
And that was it. And I, butting up against that, I had been reading a lot on St. Francis, and I had been reading a lot on the Carthusians, and this idea of poverty was just kind of rolling around in my head. It hadn't quite congealed into a real idea, but all of a sudden on the drive home, it just hit me that my primary duty here is my family, and every job that's ever existed exists for the purpose of providing for a family. That's it, right? And if you had talked to somebody 300 years ago and you had tried to explain what a career was, they would have just looked at you with a blank stare, right? You had skills, obviously, and there were people that had specific trades. But the idea of building this stable career here on earth suddenly didn't make any sense to me. Suddenly, the idea of being around my children, like our ancestors were, right? Because our ancestors, the men, they worked the fields. They were tied to the home in the same way that a mother was tied to the home. They were right there, and they were working side by side with their kids. And it just hit me that I wanted to do something radically different. I wanted to, all of my problems were largely from not trusting in God all along the way, right? It was me trying to control the world around me. And even this career concept of I need to find a stable career, it was still for this certain sense of control. And so I prayed the whole way home. And I said, this is a crazy idea, Lord, but I think what you're asking me to do is to kind of radically place my trust in you. I said, I don't know what that looks like, but I know you'll help me. So I got home, I talked to my wife, and I said, I think I figured out what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to start working on about poverty and living that out. And God bless her. She just kind of smiled and said, "Oh, okay. I don't really know what that means, but you'll explain it to me, right?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "All right, I'm all in." And that was it. That was as much of the discussion that we had about it, and then we had a lot of really joyful conversations about the principles of poverty and the value of poverty, right, for the soul. I started talking, a lot about St. Francis and things like that, and I spent a few years, a couple years, really working on the principles, and living them while I was working on them, right? So the idea was let's live this version of it, see if it's practical, And then if we need to shift gears a little, and I was working with two different priests, kind of bouncing ideas off them. And it's amazing how attuned you get to seeing God's providence. You know, when you have no means of income, and you kind of set up your world where, you know, the harvest actually matters, right? You know, there's no government insurance if my crop fails. We lost a calf 2 days ago, 2 mornings ago. I went out and we had lost a calf, and you know, that's one less cow worth of meat that we're gonna personally have in 2 years. You know, that's in 2 years that reality is gonna hit home. But it's a wild adventure, and you really can't do anything other than trust in God at that point.
Yeah.
And you learn to pray, and you learn to be more in tune to the seasons and to the general movements of life. Everything becomes really sharp and bright and colorful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the decision to, I suppose, drop what you know and dive into farming, things like that you don't have any experience of. It's one of those moments I think that people have in their life where they really make a radical decision, and they know it's radical and they know it's risky, but it's an exhilarating risk, and it's when you feel most alive. And was that your experience when you came to decide?
Oh, absolutely.
To do farming?
Yeah, I mean, every step of the way, it was just, you know, so we donated, you know, all of our savings. And, you know, if I was going to do it, I wanted to do it. I wanted to do it honestly. You know, I wanted to be able to say, I put my trust in God. It was also a way of vetting the idea, right? Because if I was willing to really radically trust in God, and God didn't like the idea, then he wasn't going to provide for it. And so we donated our savings and started praying for a piece of property. And I had kind of crunched the numbers, and I was like, I think I determined 3 acres. 3 acres, we can produce enough food to sustain us on 3 acres. And I had already started really studying, you know, different methods of agriculture, and I had no real interest in any of that beforehand. I just dove right in and just started watching any videos I could find, and I knew I wanted to do something that was, you know, really sustainable. Obviously, something I also really wanted to implement stewardship, in in a right way. I wanted to really, a lot of farming nowadays sort of throws stewardship aside, right? It kind of says, well, you know, we're going to wring what we can out of this plot, and you know, it's someone else's problem after that. I liked the idea that, you know, this 3 acres, when I was done with it, that it would hopefully be left in better shape than when I found it, for my children or for, you know, for whoever. And so, by a sort of miracle, this 3 acres came around, and we were staying with my in-laws at the time, and you know, through a long story, but in a very miraculous way, this 3 acres came around, and all of a sudden we're, you know, there we are. We've got the exact 3 acres. It was 10 minutes from our parish. You know, there's a little Latin Mass parish down the street, and it was 10 minutes from my in-laws' house. It was just kind of perfect. And I said, all right, this is it. This is like, we're planting roots. I had never lived anywhere longer than maybe a year in most of my life. So I said, this is it. This is our forever house. And I got to work. I mean, we brought in cows, and if everyone thought I was crazy, I was running 4 cows on 3 acres, doing a tight rotational grazing system. And, you know, the whole goal for me is a kind of zero input method. Poverty necessitates that, right? Which forces you to be very inventive. all of my creativity is spent on inventiveness now. It's spent on figuring out this farm. And then flash forward, I did that, and it was exhilarating and wild, and I made so many mistakes, and I built things the wrong way, um, and then I met someone from our parish who had 10 acres, and 50 acres next door went up for sale. And me and this guy had become friends for a while, and he had started kind of homesteading as well, and he got himself a couple sheep and some chickens, and he was over at my house all the time helping me butcher cows, and it was exhilarating to him, right? Because he was like a computer, like a programmer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now all of a sudden he's getting his hands dirty and he's living on the land and he's loving it.
Mm-hmm.
And one day he pulled me aside and he said, "Hey, I'm buying these 50 acres next door, and I'd like you and your family to move in. There's a house on the property. I'd like you to move in, and let's team up and let's just farm together. We can probably triple our efforts,
Mm-hmm.
by working together." And so that's what we did. And so now here we are, and now we've got way more cows and sheep and goats and 100 and something chickens, and
Oh, wow.
yeah.
So how many dozen eggs do you get a day with the chickens? Not quite 100.
Well, so the new property here. So we brought our old flock with us and we merged it with their flock. So I think that flock is getting about 30 eggs a day, something like that. The new flock, which isn't laying yet, the new flock will probably be producing. Come spring, it'll be producing probably 60 or 70 a day.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we're doing okay with our 5. We lost 2 when they were chicks. So but I think we're just less than an acre where we are. So but it's great. We've got ducks now, actually. I got ducklings just outside. So
Oh, that's funny. My daughters were just asking about geese. They said they want to get some geese. I was like, I don't know.
Well, I hear geese are aggressive and I hear ducks are messy. But
Yeah.
I think it's all about having, I don't know, like a menagerie of animals around for us. But
Yeah.
so you have some I remember hearing in another interview where you were talking about, instead of approaching land or your ideal circumstances where you'd have say a minimum budget, you would have your minimum requirements, or maximum budget, minimum requirements, which is a different kind of thing. Is that a cost minimization approach? But it's
well, so one of my goals is to kind of break myself of, and I've pretty much gotten there now, but early on I realized that we live in such a strange economic system, right? The world around us is so transactional, and that just wasn't the case for our ancestors. Our ancestors didn't live like that. Things just kind of went around, and no one was really keeping strict tabs. I mean, even up until 100 years ago, if you were in the countryside in Poland, slaughtering day, everyone showed up and meat just got distributed out, and then because you knew that next week your neighbor was going to be slaughtering and you were going to help him, and the meat was just going to kind of get distributed out. And so early on, I recognized that that strict legalistic transactionalism was problematic, and I wanted to break myself of that. And so I was always looking for ways to do that. And one of the things I realized is that when people are looking for property, they generally go, well, here's how much money I have, and this is the top, this is my budget, right? This is my maximum budget here, and then they look for the most they can get out of that, right? But I was supposed to be trusting in God, and plus we had donated all of our money away anyway, so I didn't really have a budget anyway. And I just kind of said, let me just figure out what our minimum needs are, right? And that turned out to be 3 acres. It was 3 acres, and we needed at least a 3-bedroom house. A 3-bedroom house would last us the rest of our life. Room for boys, room for girls, and then our bedroom, right? And the house was very, very small, which our new house is actually even smaller, but we got so used to being cramped together that now we just love it. We don't really spend any time in the house. You know, I'm outside 10 hours a day, and the kids are outside. You know, our ancestors, they looked at their home as a place to sleep. That was really how they looked at the home. It was where we sleep and do the cooking. That's about it, right? So yeah, looking at it as, okay, what's my minimum requirements? What do I actually need to get by? And that'll be different for everybody. You know, some family might decide, you know, well, a room for boys and a room for girls is just not going to cut it. You know, we're not going to have 8 bunk beds in this room. We need a 5-bedroom house, right? And so if that's your minimum needs, you aim at that. If you decide, well, I had decided I wasn't going to sell anything, so I wasn't trying to do a giant farm, you know. But if you crunch the numbers for yourself and you say, well, we need to sell X amount in order to, you know, recoup our costs for the farm, and so that we're not actually out of pocket, you know, for this, that, or the other. Once you figure all that out, that might work out to be 10 acres for you, or 12 acres for you, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that's a better way to approach it. And ultimately, the hardest part of homesteading is the initial 2 to 3 years, because you're just building tons and tons of infrastructure. You know, you're building fences, and you need lanes for the cows, and you need, you know, coops for the chickens, and you need this, that, and the other. And so that's where my inventiveness, my creativity is all geared at that, because that's all free for me. It's all just, what can I make out of nothing? But that doesn't mean everyone has to start that way. So if you've decided to aim for your minimum needs, and you don't worry about your budget, well, now you might end up with a little nest egg. You can go get some infrastructure built, and you can go and actually have an easier time at putting in fences and doing things like that. So I do still recommend that approach to people. Don't take the budget approach and stretch yourself all the way out, because it just doesn't make sense to do that.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the infrastructure you've put in. I understand you had one quite labor-intensive thing regarding quite a few trees.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm always learning, and I don't study too far ahead. You know, I castrated my first bull calf today, and I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to do it until this morning.
Right.
I pulled out the old Google machine and started reading, and was like, okay, well, we got to do it now. We missed the window on our last bull calf, and we had no way to catch him. We had no way. We have no way of we have large electric fenced areas that I've built, and I have this really, really organized rotational grazing system. And so I can move all the cows together right now, but I can't separate them out and say, like, you need to stay right here so I can, you know, do whatever I need to do. And we need to start training them for milking. Our permanent cows, we need to train them for milking. And we need a place where we can castrate bull calves and things like that. So I was like, well, we need to build a chute. We need to build, you know, all cattle ranch places. They have like a, you know, metal, you know, steel tubing fencing, and it's real tight and it narrows out at the end. And then they usually have like a gate system where you can send them onto a trailer, or you can send them into a holding area or whatever. So I'm thinking, okay, well, steel tubing is out of the question, right? You're looking at $40,000 for, you know, for a steel tube fencing system that'll work as a chute. Yeah, my budget is at any given time, you know, between $1 and $5. So, but we do have chainsaws, and we do have an abundance of pine trees. I found at the back of the property here, I found someone had planted almost 200 pine trees in perfect rows. and they were actually destroying the ecology up there, because pine trees really aren't good. You're not supposed to plant pine trees really close together. You know, they're acidic, so they kill off all the other plants, and they end up dying and breaking and falling down. And but this place was an old Christmas tree farm, so I think they might have planted these a long time ago and forgot about them.
Mm-hmm.
And they were about 60 feet high. So I decided, I'm a big history fan, and I love architecture. I love engineering, and so I was like, well, let's build an old Legion wall, like a Roman style Legion wall, out of tree trunks. That'll be strong enough to hold the cows in permanently. Like we'll never ever have to fix it, or work some new system in. One permanent Legion wall on one side of their paddock, and then a smaller one to kind of funnel them into a chute, and then we can build a milking stand at the end of that, build a gate on one side to send them into a trailer if we ever need to, and then put a gate on the inside of that so we can lock them in if we need to, if we need to castrate, or if someone's got a bad hoof and we need to work on it, we have somewhere where we can contain them. And I'm a big nerd, so I love the idea of this huge Roman Legion wall smack in the middle of the property, with the big pikes and the tree trunks running and everything holding it together. But it's also practical because the reason you don't see wooden fencing typically for cows is they'll just walk right through it. Cows are, they knock everything over. If you have any small trees on your property, when you start grazing cows, all those trees are gone. If they're not already established and grown, your cows are just going to knock them over. Mm-hmm. They're really destructive. So I get to build a crazy, 2,500-year-old Roman Legion wall, and we had to chainsaw about 100 trees. We have another 100 to do, but it's been a long project. But there's always something, Today I was down. We're converting the house to wood heat. So we got a 500-pound wood furnace into the basement, which was all just crazy. I had snatch blocks running across the porch and then coming through the window, and then a pulley system going down the stairs, and we're trying to maneuver this big thing down. I had to cut the top off of it just to get it to fit through the door. Mm-hmm. And so now I got to weld a top back on it,
And this is you've learned all this stuff just recently, or?
I'm making it all up as I go. So I'm always trying to tell people this. We live in the greatest time ever to throw caution to the wind and pretend that you know what you're doing, and just going off and doing it, because there's endless stuff on you. There's nothing you can't learn on YouTube. Also, people are more wasteful now than they've ever been in the history of the world. I just drive around and pick stuff up on the side of the road all the time. Constantly. Half of what we have, our furniture, most of it was found on the side of the road. Scrap wood to build things with. I find most of our needs on the side of the road. My wife was praying for a car seat. She was like, "Yeah, I really want a new car seat. I just want a different car seat." And I was like, "Well, I'm not gonna, we're not gonna buy a car seat. We have a car seat that works. I'm not gonna buy another car seat." And the very next day, there's a car seat sitting on the side of the road. So we stopped, we picked it up, and it was perfect. It was exactly what she wanted. So
yeah,
it's just always like that. I don't buy any food for the animals. Everything comes off the land. And we just got 3 trailer loads of free pumpkins, because so around here during the fall time, you have pumpkin patches. It's a very autumn sort of a thing, right? And everyone goes to the pumpkin patch and they buy really expensive apple cider, and they ride the hay rides, and they just kind of hang out. And you can buy, pumpkins for $60 to put on your front porch. Mm-hmm. Well, these pumpkin patch guys, they grow way more pumpkins than they can ever sell. And then they just throw them away. after pumpkin patch season is over, they've made so much money because they're selling pumpkins for $60, right? Which is crazy. I mean, if you live in the country, when you find out like how easy it is to grow pumpkins, the fact that they're selling them for $60, I mean, their profit margins are through the roof. And so they're fine with just throwing these, we're talking about thousands and thousands of pounds of pumpkins. They're fine with just throwing them out. And so someone called us, a friend of ours from our church called us and was like, hey, the pumpkin patch next door to me, I'm friends with them. And they said they were throwing their pumpkins away. And I said, I know someone that always takes things that are being thrown away. And sure enough, I was that guy. So I drove out there. It was 3 trips, and we filled up a 14-foot trailer 3 different times, and smashed all those pumpkins up, put them in a composting system. And that's going to feed my chickens all winter. So
I think this fits in with the kind of providence and the exhilaration of the journey, where you're kind of living day to day, and you're completely reliant.
No, I never know how the animals are going to be fed. Not exactly, I never know how things are going to work out. Not exactly, but I know they're going to work out. I know they're going to work out one way or another, and they just keep working out. The wood stove, I was like, I can't afford gas. It's just not in the budget. I live in a part of the world though where heating my family is an absolute necessity. Our winters are 6 months long,
Yeah.
And so I knew that wood was the way to go. Wood is free. I get free wood all year. I just drive around and clean people's yards for them. And when I see a tree fell over in someone's yard, I knock on their door and I say, hey, I would happily clean your tree up for free if I could take it. And that's it. And 1 or 2 trees is enough wood for almost the whole winter. Like, I mean, a real tree, a big oak tree or something, that's almost a whole winter's worth of wood. And so wood's free. And then I needed a wood stove, but I can't afford a wood stove. And so I prayed, and I was visiting a friend of mine, and he's building a chapel on his property. And so he's converting this old mechanic shop that was on the property. And he said, yeah, I got to clean this whole mechanic shop out, And I said, oh, yeah, it looks like a big job. He said, yeah, I got to figure out what to do. This wood stove's like 500 pounds, and I gotta get rid of it. You don't happen to want it, do you? And I was like, yeah, I do actually. I've been praying for one. Thank you. So that's just again and again and again. It's just how it works.
Yeah, it's amazing. So, do you have a water source that you have handy, or like, is it rainwater that you run off, or is it town water that you have?
Yeah, so we have a well, and currently our well operates on electricity. So that's, pretty much our only overhead is electricity. I think that's our only reoccurring cost in our whole life, basically, is electricity. So we do have a well that runs on electricity. We have a large catchment pond at the back of the property. We're in a wetlands, so getting rid of water is more of an issue for us. Yeah, we're never going to have a water shortage. There's about 4 acres on the back of the property are an actual wetlands with, probably 50 different types of waterfowl that come through all year. But I am going to build a windmill system. And so I want to build a windmill system that runs a pump. And I want to build a large water catchment system on top of that. So think like a large above ground cistern, a water tower, right? Well, you're in Australia, so y'all know all about water towers. So I want to build one towards the back of the property. And I want the passive energy of the wind to pump and keep that thing filled. And then once it's pumped, I have that now as reserve energy, right? So that water is in reserve. It provides enough water pressure to basically be able to get water anywhere that I need it, around the property. That's enough water pressure to push a hose worth of water, 5 acres or whatever. So that eventually that will be the water system here. Until then, we are beholden to the pumps, and we have an emergency generator in case we don't have electricity, because water is, it's the most crucial aspect of this whole thing.
I see what you mean when you say your creativity is taken up in your work, because it requires an immense amount of ingenuity to come up with those things, just to make sure self-sufficiency can happen. So
yeah, it is. I think that's what creativity is for.
Mm.
It's it's funny. Someone that was nominated for an Emmy, someone whose entire life revolved around the arts, right? I can look at a film and break it. Well, probably not anymore. I think that part of my brain probably rotted away. But I used to be able to look at a film and I could break it down from a structural engineering standpoint. I could break it down from composition. I could tell you all the artistic yada yada about it. And I'm now fully convinced that the arts are supposed to be an overflow. I think that creativity is primarily for the purpose of that kind of ingenuity that invents, that kind of ingenuity that's practical. I was having this conversation with somebody, and they kept trying to argue it, and it was a good Catholic guy that I'm good friends with, and it was funny because he was, as Catholics, we hold the arts in high esteem, right? I mean, we gave the world such great art. And art really does, move the mind and heart to God. But his argument was this: well, look at the great cathedrals. And I said, yeah, that's part of my point, right? The great cathedrals were built by men who were masters of their craft. They had a strong artistic bend, obviously, because they built these things that were exceptionally artistic. But they were practical men. They were men that built structures that were meant for use, right? And he said, well, what about, someone like Michelangelo? I said, aha. Michelangelo was not just an artist, right? He was a master in all the sciences. He was a master inventor. He was hired by dignitaries to invent contraptions for them. He was a very practical man. And I think that I think it's our nature, our fallen nature, to invert everything. And as of now, my creative abilities, they don't overflow into any arts. They're very much at home and put to use in the farm for now. Maybe that'll change someday. Yeah. Maybe when all the widgets are in place and all the all the infrastructure is in place and the farm is functioning, and I've got all the contraptions that open doors and move water up to towers, and it's when it's all done, maybe I'll get that artistic ability, right? That creative ability. Maybe it'll start overflowing into other areas. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful to have things that are practical and creative and artistic. I mean, I think that's why we're attracted to kind of medieval hamlets, and why we're attracted to European villages and cities. It's because they were built with this fully integrated kind of system or worldview. Whereas now, particularly in the States, Australia as well, everything's built for utilitarian reasons. And you could easily just tear it down. There'll be very little heritage listing of modern buildings because it's lost sense of the importance of beauty.
No, there won't be any McDonald's or Walmarts on the Heritage Foundation list, right? And it's a shame. It does something to the mind and the soul, I think, to not be surrounded by beauty, right? To be surrounded by drudgery and just plain utility. So everything I build here, that shoot is going to be interesting. It's going to be a great joy to look at. You could travel all over the United States and you're never going to find a big 8-foot high Roman Legion wall. It's just, you're
You're
not
going
going to
to end
find
up with
one.
your own architectural style after this.
Right. And, I think it's important, right? Because my kids love this place.
Mhm.
They absolutely, they're madly in love with this place, just like I am. And a big part of it is because of the beauty. My chicken coop was a wild design. My first chicken coop, I based the design on a suspension bridge. I wanted the whole coop to be dangling like a suspension bridge. And so I built the structure that way, and it wasn't practical at all, but it was really neat. And the new one is way more practical, but it's also very beautiful.
Mm.
And I think beauty is extremely important. I think, and we see this with our churches, right? I mean, we've moved more and more into practicality, and people tend to show up less and less, right? I mean, that's
Mm.
you know,
Anyone who
beauty,
gets married wants to find an old church.
right?
That's and it's just a thing. We're called to beauty, and
Yeah.
our faith should reflect that, though.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
When you look at the old monasteries, and that was one of my inspirations when I first started this whole lifestyle. Is I really loved European monasteries, and they're all farms,
mm,
right? I mean, all the old monasteries are farms. They all have some agrarian aspect to them, and they're so beautiful. These agrarian people, peasants that ran the agrarian aspect of it, the monks that worked there and lived there, whatever it was. It was important to them to make it beautiful.
mm,
When they built a stone structure, they made it beautiful. When they built a wall or a hedge, they made it beautiful.
mhm,
There just isn't any reason. The American version of homesteading, unfortunately, right now is very much that rugged, build it all with scrap pallet wood, and as long as it stays together, as long as the critters can't get in and the chickens can't get out, then you're good to go.
yeah.
But I think that's a mistake. I think our children will greatly benefit from that beauty. And I get that criticism sometimes, because I do talk a lot about the benefits of poverty.
Mhm.
Um, and so inevitably there's always someone that'll see a picture of my house and they'll say, "Well, I saw a nice painting on your wall. If you're poor, how come you didn't sell that?" "Well, I saw your china cabinet, with this, that, or the other. I saw your altar with your reliquary or whatever."
Mhm.
And they mistake the idea that poverty means ugly.
Mhm.
You know, they fall into that trap of thinking that, well, if you're poor, you shouldn't have beautiful things. But it's really the opposite. I would rather have almost nothing practical, and the last thing left will be the beautiful paintings on the wall. If we've got to
Mhm.
sell a couch, for some reason, or
Mhm.
we got rid of our microwave a while back, and it was just our microwave stopped working, and a new microwave wasn't in the cards, and
Uh-huh.
it's funny because within a month we forgot that microwaves even exist.
Yeah.
You know, it just life just moves on. You heat your
Yeah.
food in the oven. It takes 5 times longer. I just eat all my food cold.
Okay.
I just take a meatloaf out of the fridge and I'm good to go.
There you go.
But yeah,
Yeah. So you're trying to create obviously a beautiful home architecturally, trying to form a beautiful life for your family. You've got 4 daughters now, I
I
believe.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you could give us your thoughts on what's the greatest thing about fatherhood and what's the most challenging thing about fatherhood in your own context.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the greatest thing about fatherhood, my experience, has been it's been that if you're really open, right? Because there's obviously people that do not embrace this aspect of fatherhood. If you're really open to this idea, you realize that every time your kids are looking at you,
Mm.
Um, they are looking at what they believe is an ideal, right?
Mm.
You aren't just a person to them. You aren't just the guy that comes home and reads them a book or whatever. You
Mm.
are an idea also.
Mm.
Um, and if you embrace that, it will challenge you um, to become great, right? We're called to greatness.
Mm.
It's not a lack of humility to say, I want to be great, right? I want to be a saint. I want to close my eyes and I want to open them on the beatific vision. Well, judgment first, but beatific vision.
Mm.
I don't give any lip service to, well, there's always purgatory. I want to be a saint. I want to go, I want to go right to see the face of our Lord. Um, and nothing, I can't imagine anything being a greater help to that than looking into my children's eyes and seeing their idea reflected back at me,
Mm.
right? The fatherness, I guess, right?
Mm.
As Aristotle would say, the quid esse of fatherness. Yeah,
Mm.
that's what you are to them, and that's a terrifying challenge, but it's also an exhilarating challenge.
Yeah.
Um, and it can strive you if you embrace that and you really run with it. And I think to a lesser degree, that's true of the reflection you get from your wife as well, right? She's
Mm.
the same challenge because she sees you as husbandness, right? Whatever husbandness is, but she's also, she's a fully rational adult, right? So she also understands that you're imperfect and you're going to make mistakes. Kids don't,
No.
right?
No.
They just see an ideal. You
Mm.
are the ideal. Um, and man, if you can grab hold of that early and you can run with it,
Mm.
you can just say, okay, well, how can I be the greatest that I can possibly be? And it really does strive you on. Um, and then also, it also, I think, helps in humility because, when you do make those mistakes, humbling yourself to the little people who look at you as an ideal,
Mm.
right? Um, it's also beneficial and it's necessary. It's when you make mistakes to your children, you have to reconcile with them the way you have to reconcile with anybody else,
Yeah.
and that's a lot harder. I can reconcile with my wife pretty easily,
Mm.
but getting down on one knee in front of my daughter and saying, I spoke a little too sternly just now.
Mm.
Um, it wasn't called for. That's a lot harder.
And it's quite something when you see how quick they are to forgive you and how they squeeze you extra. It's quite
Yeah.
something. I mean, I think to be a father, it's on the one level you can see how the relationship. I started to understand a bit more about God once I became a father because I understood
Mm-hmm.
what it was for a child to trust, and what
Yeah.
our role as trusting children is. And if you were to say, well, I don't trust you, God, to do this, it's similar to saying to your father, well, I don't trust you to catch me, and how
Yeah.
heartbreaking that is. But also in terms of being the ideal, and you see the important link between being good, or good fathers generally, and people accepting the idea of God as Father. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's just so important because in terms of if you're trying to instill faith in your own children, you need to, in a sense, mirror God in terms of justice, mercy, love, all those things. And with that experience, then they can kind of understand God the Father in that way. But I guess I'm
Yeah.
not interviewed, but yeah,
No,
I
it's
mean,
so true. They're you are an image of God to them,
mm,
right? I mean, we're all made in God's image and likeness, but you in a very particular way are an image of God to your children and I to mine.
mhm,
Um, and it's a big responsibility.
mhm,
I think we sometimes forget that, our duty is not just to make sure that they're catechized, right? It's not just to make sure that they learn the virtues, and that they, they have a sufficient amount of virtue to strive on, and to grow. But it's also to be that image for them, because you're going to, no matter what, you're going to be their image of God, no matter what. Um, and then also you're forced to trust wholly in God, because we are just so we're just so fallible, right? And so my last prayer every night is always, Lord, please give my daughters all the graces they need to overcome whatever mistakes I've made, right? Um, shore up whatever hurt feelings might be there, shore up whatever little damages I've done, right? Because they're always, it's inevitable.
Yeah.
And they're ultimately God's, right? More than they're mine. That was, I think, an interesting realization. And I remember that struck me when my first daughter was born. I remember laying in the hospital room. I was holding her. She was sleeping on my chest, so my wife could get some sleep. And I just stared at her sleeping for like 4 hours, and it just went by in the blink of an eye. His first daughter, right? So, now I'm like, oh, who's taking her now? But I remember praying all through that night, and I remember just being so poignantly aware of the fact that while all the responsibility is mine, right? I am responsible for this little person. I have a duty, right? A sacred duty to provide for them and to protect them. But it's a dignity that is it's a dignity that's a gift, right? Because she's actually God's, right? She belongs to God, and God is allowing me to participate in her, her eternal beatitude, if you will, right? The possibility, her destiny to look upon the face of God. I'm just participating in that, which is strange. The love that God has for us to give us the dignity of participating in His creation is we'll never exhaust the mystery of that. It's baffling. But they're His. And when I'm doing His will and I'm conforming to His will, then I'm doing a good job. And when I'm enforcing my own will, I'm not doing a good job. I don't remember which saint it was that, said, the only thing I can add to the equation is the sin and the mistakes. When God's working, everything's working out just fine. But I have nothing to add to the equation except for sin and mistakes. So
yeah, right.
I just pray that God keeps speaking loud and clear, so I can keep listening.
Yeah. And do you homeschool?
We do. Yeah, we homeschool.
Yeah. Is that I'm sorry, I was thinking, because you live the farm life. We don't quite live it, but we're homeschooling as well, and my wife is very big on outdoor ed. Would you say that's a component?
Yeah. Yeah. Our well, first of all, we're fortunate to live in a state that is pretty lax on homeschool laws, because we have no particular curriculum. We're taking a more traditional approach. So it's really just, reading, logic, grammar, rhetoric, right? It's that sort of core thing. We're not going off into all the other subjects for quite a while until, logic and a lot of reading has come through. And so the kids really just spend a lot of time they spend a lot of time playing. And it's funny because my mother-in-law a while back, she was like, well, y'all aren't getting into math. She should be in math already. I was like, well, traditionally nobody studied math until much later in life, if they, if they needed to study the higher math. So because math is just a practical, like, you'll actually learn a lot of math just living life, right? And sure enough, my 5-year-old, she can already do multiplication. She doesn't know it's multiplication, but she can do multiplication. She can add as many things as she needs together. She just asked me recently if I could teach her to use the hammer. I said, yeah, you're old enough to use the hammer. So I gave her some 10 pennies and a hammer. And she said, can I use some of the scrap wood? I said, you can use whatever scrap wood you want. Go ahead. So she's all day, she's dragging this wood across the yard and she's hammering it all together. And she's got my measuring tape out there. And I'm thinking, she doesn't know how to use a measuring tape. And I go over, I was like, baby, what are you working on? She said, I'm building a fort and it's going to be like this. And she's explaining it to me. And I said, that's okay. That's great. And I'm thinking, there's no way she's going to accomplish this. Well, first of all, she already had a few pieces of wood nailed together. And I look and it's perfectly even. And I said, how did you get this in the middle? And she said, oh, I just measured all the way across and I counted the lines. And then I counted half of the lines. And I was like, yeah, okay. Well, that worked. Your board's right in the middle. So that's great. Now we just got to work on the engineering aspect of things because it is a shoddy fort. I mean, the big bad wolf is going to blow that thing right over, but it's even.
Yeah, right. No, that's the thing, and the way, I mean, public and in a sense even private education is going nowadays. I have a feeling that having them reading, writing, and doing basic maths is they're well ahead of their peers.
Yeah.
And I think
my eldest daughter. Yeah, my eldest daughter is exceptional, so I try not to look at her as the standard bearer in our home. She's just she just has a disposition that's just geared that way. But the other girls are, I mean, they're coming along really well. I mean, they can hold their own we have a really large friends group, and they can hold their own, and they can read and they can do things that most kids at their age aren't doing yet. So I think I think they're fine. What's nice though is I actually don't really care very much. I mean, what I mean by that is I think that's another, along with our weird economic, sort of legalistic transactional society. I actually, and this is probably too controversial to say, but I'll say it anyway. I think we put too much emphasis on education. I really do. I think that, there have been many great and happy saints who have been very productive and who have gone to do great things, who didn't have the abundance of education that we think should be the standard today. I think we have this sort of like standard in our minds that has to be hit, and I think different people are different. I mean, I just don't think that everyone has to reach that same level. My eldest daughter certainly will. She just, like I said, her disposition is just geared that way. She's just highly intelligent. And then I have other kids that I'll probably push them more towards other things. I have a daughter that she loves playing on the piano, and she walks up. I found back in my old motorcycle days, I used to always carry out my harmonica with me. And quite frankly, just because it was cool. It's just cool to pull out the harmonica and, play harmonica in a group, and everyone goes, ooh, a motorcycle guy with a harmonica. But I hadn't seen it in like 10 years. It was just in a box in my study, and I was going through some old stuff, and so I gave it to my second daughter, and she has not stopped playing that thing for 2 months, and she's actually putting songs together now, right? So, kids are all just different, and I strongly, people that are getting into homeschooling especially, I strongly suggest not getting too bent out of shape over curriculums and over whether your kid's at a certain level or where are they supposed to be. They're not supposed to be anywhere. They're just supposed to get to heaven, and that's fine. Forget what society says.
Yeah. I think back in, I mean, Australia was built on people not going to university. The vast majority didn't. They had a basic education, went out and got busy. Whereas I think now it's expected people go to university for the sake of going there, and before you know it, they're 24, and they're just beginning in a lot of ways.
Yep.
And they're leaving everything way too late. So there's something to be said for back to basics and just knuckling down and cultivating virtue and cultivating beauty, truth, those kind of things, but also being very practical.
Well, and you'll never fully for Catholics, because that's just true on a natural level. I think that's true across the board for everybody. I recommend that to literally everybody in every stripe of life. But as Catholics, you will never really grasp Scripture and the liturgical calendar the way you will once you get back to the land.
Mm-hmm.
So much of Scripture is founded on a shorthand, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the shorthand is agrarianism. The Psalms, I mean, everything comes to life in a completely different way once you embrace that sort of back to the land idea. All of a sudden, everything just comes alive. I remember the very first year that I had cows. Obviously, I was running 4 cows on 3 acres. So I was overstocked.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just desperate. I was moving them through these tight grazing patterns across my 3 acres. And I was about to circle back around. And I mean, the grass at the beginning hadn't even started growing yet. It was the middle of summer and we were in a long drought. And I was just thinking, I'm going to have to butcher a cow. Like, it's not even mature yet. I'm just going to have to butcher a teenager cow and eat it because I'm out of grass.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm praying. And all of a sudden, I think I was 5 or 6 days away from circling back around, and the sky opens up, and we just had 3 days of rain. And I have never felt I've never felt a relief like that. I've never felt this just like absolute relief.
Mm.
And you're reading the Psalms, and the Psalms are constantly talking about, my soul is like the earth without rain. And you can't quite, when you read it as a city slicker, right? As a guy in LA making movies, when I would read the Psalms,
Mm-hmm.
we would pray in the office in the morning and you're reading the Psalms. I remember, oh yeah, my soul's like the earth without rain. Yeah, sure, because the earth needs rain. Yeah, okay. That's as deep as you really go with it. But man, when you are desperate for rain because your life depends on it, right? Like these people that were writing these Psalms, they were so tied to the land. It's a shorthand. It connects you with them. And the liturgical calendar is the same. I always joke with people and I say, I just want to remind everybody that, while we have the feast days of the saints, and we have, people often look at, the great monarchs, the great Catholic monarchs throughout history. Our church was built on the peasants, right? And I say that I don't say that in a derogatory way. The word peasant doesn't have a negative connotation for me. I think the peasants were very happy in their lives, and the church gave them the entire liturgical calendar. The entire liturgical calendar is directly linked to the agrarian cycle.
That's right. Yeah. For the Northern Hemisphere.
So the church, yeah,
I just point that out because we tried to do the same and it's all topsy-turvy.
Oh, that is so funny. Oh, that's never even occurred to me.
Yeah,
that's never occurred to me. Well, yeah, what boy?
But
that's
why
wild.
my wife is keen to start some new traditions with Australia's only saint is Mary MacKillop, And so she's big on trying to celebrate her and find ways in which we can kind of use Australian flowers and Australian food and
Right.
things like that to celebrate. But I guess, that's the joy of being Catholic, though. It's a
Right.
universal faith, and it's celebrated differently in different parts of the world based upon
That's right.
the situation.
Yeah.
So tell me, how does your family like celebrate the feasts and fasts throughout the year? Is there
We excuse me. We we're pretty tight on all the seasons, and we have many feast days. I'm real big on keeping feast days. I think it's important to you fast hard and you feast hard, right?
mhm,
The church always gave us more feast days than she gave us fasting days. But well, so we've got our altar here, and I have a lot of friends that are priests, and so when we have visiting priests, it's nice to have a place for them to say mass, and we get mass
mhm,
here at the house, which is a bonus. But um, we were here at the new property. We moved in right around Advent, and that was the first time that the Advent wreath came to life for me,
mhm,
because I said, "Okay, girls, Advent's starting tomorrow. Let's go build an Advent wreath for the altar." You
mhm,
know, and it's amazing because there's very little greenery left, right? There's very little
yeah,
color left.
mhm,
Everything is gray. All the leaves have fallen. And so we're scouring this. I mean, it's a pretty big property. We've got, acres of woods, and we're scouring for color. And
mhm,
we find, so, obviously we find some pine boughs, and we find, the pine always, stays green. And we find different types of pine to weave together. And then we find these like silver purple vines. I don't know what they were. They just trip me every time I'm trying to walk through the woods. I don't have
mhm,
any clue what kind of plant it is, but they're like this silvery purple color. And so we use that to tie the pines together. And then we come across this little clearing, and there's just all these red berries. And keep in mind, it's just gray. As far as you can see, it's
mhm,
just gray. And all of a sudden, there's these little red berries,
mhm,
no clue what they were. When we snip them all, and we stuff them into this wreath, and we had this beautiful big wreath that covered this whole altar back here. And it was amazing because we made it by hand, and it looked spectacular.
wow,
And it stayed all through the season. Um, and so all of Advent, we had that wreath that we worked on as a family, and
mhm,
um, but so we keep the fasts and the feasts, and we try to go big for all the seasons.
mhm,
I like the penitential seasons. So I like Lent. I keep St. Michael's Lent, um, which is which is always traumatic because it feels like Lent just ended, and you're like, another Lent. But it's
For those who don't know what St. Michael's Lent is, just fill them in.
St. Michael's Lent is it's a sort of optional penitential season, that goes from the Assumption to Michaelmas, the feast day of Saint Michael.
Mhm,
And it's Saint Francis of Assisi received his stigmata right at the end. He always kept Saint Michael's Lent, and he received his stigmata right at the end of it. A lot of the great saints kept St. Michael's Lent. It was very popular, but it was
mhm,
always optional. It wasn't mandatory, right? So it was just sort of an extra thing.
mhm,
And we keep Advent pretty tightly. We keep Advent as a penitential season.
mhm,
So for us, Advent, the penitential aspect of Advent for us is to kind of quiet the world, right? So, um, music. There's not a lot of music going on in the house during that time. We sing "O Come Emmanuel" each night, and we pray all the Advent prayers together, and we light the candles.
mhm,
What's nice about approaching Advent in the old way is that it's hard in the world we live in because everyone's celebrating Christmas all
Yeah,
through
the
Advent.
Christmas parties are early December.
Right.
And
Yeah.
they forget that Christmas is a 12-day feast. Hmm.
Right. That's right.
And,
And so, what's interesting is we've gotten better and we've gotten a little stricter about we just don't do it now. When we're invited to Christmas parties, we just say no, thank you. And we really try harder and harder to keep Advent penitential. And it's amazing because Christmas just comes to life. Christmas is so joyful, right? Because you're slowly quieting your faculties
mhm.
and you're slowly preparing for the coming of our Lord, and then the joy of Christmas. So we get our Christmas tree a couple days before Christmas. We go out and we chop one down and we put it up, and then we decorate it, and we don't right before Christmas, and we don't light it up. And then when we go to Christmas Vigil, I plug it in after the girls get in the car, so they don't see it plugged in,
Yeah.
And then when they get home from the vigil mass, they get to come in and the whole house is lit up. So that's the first time they see the house lit up,
Yeah.
And it really brings the Christmas season to life. It really makes the Christmas season not seem redundant.
Yeah.
And the kids love it. I mean, one thing that I always challenge people, because I feel like a lot of times people use the excuse of their children as the reason why embracing the penitential seasons, it just, they think, well, it's too much for kids, well, the kid, maybe we'll do it, but, not for the kids. Kids love penitential seasons. My daughters are so excited to give up chocolate or give up whatever. And, now they're at the point where they're clamoring to find more and more. I actually had my 5-year-old, the one who wants to start her own order of nuns. I got to smack her down sometimes. I'm like, whoa. Then that's too much,
Yeah, I think we underestimate kids in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Their capacity to learn, their capacity to sacrifice, all those kind of things. But they're naturally giving, and they want to.
Yep.
If you can tell them, look, you offer it up for souls or offer it up for poor people, they want to do it.
Yep. Oh yeah.
You need to provide opportunities for them.
And my daughter, last Lent, she was I don't know, she was learning about the Sisters of Charity, I think. And so they were talking about, feeding the poor, and they were talking about, in the Lenten season. And I was teaching her about the corporal works of mercy. And she says, well, Daddy, we got to go feed the poor this Lent. And, for people who haven't, been in a downtown area, around Skid Row, it might seem kind of idyllic, but, it's a scary environment to have kids. Largely, not necessarily, the physical danger aspect of it, but, their innocence and these people, they're liable to say anything, right? They're very different morals, and you hear all kinds of crazy stuff when you're feeding the poor. And as an adult, it just rolls off your shoulders. But I've worked really hard to shelter my children, and I don't see that phrase "sheltered my children." I don't see that in a negative way. That's my job. My job is to shelter them, to maintain their innocence. And so I'm putting it off, and I'm putting it off. And at the time, she wanted to be a Sister of Charity. And so she's crying. She literally just is crying. And she said, how am I going to be a Sister of Charity if I can't feed the poor? I said, okay. I said, all right, we'll do it. We'll do it. So she made sandwiches, and I just let her do all of it. She made sandwiches all day, and we packed them up, and we went downtown, just me and her. And it was amazing because, she's dressed, she's dressed like a little lady, and she's walking around, and I'm just walking with her. I'm just letting her run the show. I was like, well, where are we going? She says, I see some people over here. Okay. And she's handing out these sandwiches, and all of a sudden, these people just change. And I've been down there so many times. I knew what to expect, and it was the exact opposite. Seeing her, all of a sudden, everyone was on their best behavior. Thank you, little lady. Thank you, ma'am. And it was amazing to see. But seeing seeing how desperately she wanted to fulfill those precepts, right? Like if you, I mean, if you light that fire in kids, you really can't put it out again. You know,
Mhm.
it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, my daughter, that's her. My eldest daughter, she loves the penitential seasons, and she loves the corporal works of mercy, especially.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's something I've got to get to do. I think we know some good nuns down in the valley, and I was thinking, how young's too young? But it might be time. If yours are doing it in the streets, then we can manage it.
She was 5. She was 5. I will say though that I was a little more comfortable with her. You know, let's say my second daughter,
Mhm.
it all depends on the kid, right? My second
Yeah.
daughter, I don't think she's going to be out there when she's 5.
Mhm.
I think 7 maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll just depend on her, you know, her maturity.
Hmm.
But I knew that, you know, even in the worst case scenario, I knew that I could contextualize it for her, and that she
Hmm.
could grasp what was going on, and that she would be okay.
Yeah.
I didn't like the idea, to be quite frank. I didn't like the idea of having to say, okay, sometimes people say bad things or whatever, right?
Hmm.
But it didn't happen.
Yeah.
It was an amazing thing to see the change in people when they're approached by a little 5-year-old bringing them a sandwich. You know,
It's very disarming.
it
Mm.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah, it was pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so cool. So one idea I had when I was kind of researching your story was thinking, well, you got some themes that coming through, providence and poverty, and so it struck me that Matthew 6 would be an interesting chapter of the verse to look through with you, just to get your take on it, because I've heard
Yeah,
other takes on it. So if you don't mind, I'll just read it for everyone's benefit, and then I'll invite you to kind of reflect on it, and we can just pick up the conversation again. So excuse me, everyone, while I read. So this is Matthew 6:25 to 34. Do not be anxious about your life, what you shall eat or what you shall drink, nor about your body, what you shall put on. Is life not worth more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not more valuable than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add 1 cubit to his span of life? And why are you anxious about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is alive and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O men of little faith? Therefore, do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them all. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be yours as well. Therefore, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Let the day's own trouble be sufficient for the day. I love that. And
that's beautiful.
we were gonna kind of frame that and put it on the wall, because I think it's, again, we're going back to that kind of radical call. I've heard people describe that as hyperbole, that passage, as if it's, figurative and not literal. But I was wondering, given the evident choices you made in your life, what your take on that would be.
Well, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I think you know, the aspect of poverty that really facilitates that, um, embracing that, is that money, and we all do this without realizing it. You know, money is our buffer. You know, our financial means, is really a buffer for us, which
Mhm.
is ironic because it then also becomes so much anxiety for us, I think, as well. But you know, you can always throw money at a problem, right? You can always go, well, you know, this isn't going the right way, but you know, but we have a little extra money and we can, you know, throw it at that. When you when you don't have that option, you really do have to just trust in God. And I don't think that it's hyperbole. I think that that's what our Lord asks of us. I
Mm-hmm.
think I think I think what God the Father wants from us is for us to understand that He's our Father, right? And He's a good Father who provides for us every breath we take, right? I mean, when you get all the way down to it, we have existence, right? Um, God is existence, right? I think St. Thomas describes God's nature as the subsistent act of all being. He is being itself, right? And then He shares that with us. And so every aspect of our life is that, and we just aren't aware of it. And the more we give that over and the more we start trusting in God, all we're doing is recognizing that He's providing for us anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want to grab hold of it, I mean, He's going to let us. We want to grab hold of it, and we want to control every aspect of it and put up all those buffers so that
Mm-hmm.
all the problems can't come to us. He'll let us do that. The
Mm-hmm.
irony is, that that's still Him providing for us because we have the whatever mental capacity we need for our job and everything else. Um, but He just wants us to see that all things go back to Him.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally think that the approach there in Matthew is more efficacious. It's more efficacious in growing closer to God and growing to love Him like good, dutiful sons. It's funny because this approach that I've taken to life early on was terrifying, and then again and again and again, I kept coming up against the wall, and then in the most miraculous ways, God would just shower our needs upon us, right? And for like 2 years, I remember feeling really ashamed because I would still let myself start worrying. What am I going to do? Oh, was this a good idea? I have this coming up. I have this. We have this bill all of a sudden. We have this. We have that. And again and again, it was just. I mean, just miracle after miracle. Just things just kept falling right out of the sky, practically.
Mm-hmm.
And I still find myself sometimes forgetting that. And it's absurd. It's absurd that I can still forget that. But
Yeah.
that's how entrenched we are in our materialism, right? In our sort of our nascent naturalism, right? Our inclination to reject that God is the subsistent act of all being,
Yeah.
right? Because that's the inclination. That's the fallen inclination, is to reject that, and to reject that we are literally held into existence by the mind of God. And every breath we take, every last thing He has to give us. I remember, I grew up in a world where what you wore was important, right? You were supposed to look a certain way, and you needed a bunch of suits for different things, and you needed all this stuff. And when I started this, I was like, well, without money, my clothes are going to wear out.
Mm-hmm.
My wife doesn't really know how to sew. She's learning, but she's not going to be making me all the work clothes I need and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember all of a sudden, my parish does this little rummage sale every year, and there's just a bunch of junk clothes and random things, and I went, wait a minute, and they sell it for like $1, right? So I can get a whole year's worth of clothes for literally $15. And those clothes are going to, those are all the work clothes I need for the year, and they're going to get worn out, and they're going to get holes in them and everything else. But, it's $15. And, what we clothe ourselves with, what our food, we lost that calf 2 days ago. And, that's food that's not going to be on our table in 2 years, or it's food that's not going to be on someone's table in 2 years. But 2 years is a long way off. I don't know what the world is going to look like in 2 years. I don't know how that calf is going to be replaced by something else, or we'll have a boom of abundance, somewhere else, but I just don't really worry about it anymore.
Yeah.
God really does provide for us, and it's not really, why does he provide for us? Again, going back to the original principle, he provides for us because he loves us, but because he's always trying to draw us into that. People get uncomfortable with the word submission, but the submitting our hearts to his love, right? Unguarded hearts that are just willing to lay down and say, you are what's best for me. I can't plan anything for myself. I can't come up with any idea for myself that's better than what God has in store, right? And I think that a lot of people struggle with that. I think that's one of the curses of our age, is that we're in a time where everyone's supposed to pick themselves up by their bootstraps. Times are hard. Providing for a family in the world today is hard. And I think that people can get caught up in that and forget that whatever it looks like for you, God has it, and he might be calling you, by the way, to make greater sacrifices. He might be calling you to let go of your need to have cable TV or whatever, right? We haven't had TV in 6 years. And but so a big part of that is, God is also trying to sanctify us. And so that's the give and take, right? The give and take is, I'm providing everything you need, but I know exactly what you need, and I know exactly what you don't need, right? And that's part of the trust too.
Yeah, right. Because what we think we need is sometimes the complete opposite. Mother Teresa, she'd have this saying, whereas our role is to accept God's will, and if it's God's will that we should live in a palace, we should live in a palace. If it's God's will that we're thrown into the street, that we live into the street, not to put ourselves in the street, but to accept it, understanding that that's what, in a roundabout way, he wants for us, because there's something deeper that we're to learn. And so it's that kind of, it's a learning through suffering, I think, is where we don't want to go. But that's the real.
We have to suffer.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we have to suffer, and that's the buffer that an abundance of financial means provides. It's a buffer for suffering, right? That's what it's always used for. It's always used to put a little distance between us and the thing that makes us suffer. And a lot of times we need to let loose of that, and we need to embrace those things that make us suffer. None of us will get to heaven without suffering. That's the nature of it. The nature of it is that purgation that we all need, and that's also why God's a good father. It's not just him showering us with things, right? It's also him never giving up on our sanctification. Nothing imperfect enters into heaven, and through a kind of power that is unfathomable, God can turn finite beings into perfect beings, right? That's I can't grasp that. I can't understand how that's even possible, but he does it. And we have the whole history of the church, and we have the saints as our example, and we need only to trust in that, and trust that God does not waste a single ounce of suffering. He doesn't give you not one single ounce of suffering more than what you need to attain the beatific vision, right? So that's a hard thing to trust. I mean, when we're in the deep of our suffering, we're in the deep of loss. It's hard. It's hard to stop and remind ourselves that, well, God's the master of all history, and He's a good Father, and He would never give me not a single drop of suffering that I don't actually need. Right?
Yeah. All right. Well, I think where are we? We've been at it for almost an hour and 15 minutes. It's what time is it at your neck of the woods?
I'm not completely sure. It's 11:15. Midnight's right around the corner.
PM. So thanks very much, Bug, for taking the time to speak to us and for staying up late after putting your girls to bed.
Yes.
If people want to get in touch, they can go through CatholicSpeakers.com. Is that right?
Yes. And if anyone ever just wants to reach out and chat, I'm on Twitter and Instagram, and I have my messages open on there, and I chat with people all the time about faith or farming. Faith and farming. Those are my two topics of discussion.
I tell you what, there's an appetite. We've got a town called Armidale where a number of Catholics have moved over and are trying to live out that vision, and also in the Rock down in New South Wales. And so I'm sure you'll have provided a lot of inspiration for them. I'm sure they'll devour this episode. And I'm sure for anyone else out there who's watching, I hope God's touched you in a way that can lead you from wherever you're at the moment. And we hope to do more of these in the future. But Bug, thanks very much for being our guest. And just for those who are interested in the work of the Thomas More, you can find us on Facebook. You can also subscribe to this channel because we're just getting going. So thank you all for watching. Thanks, Bug. You have a great and blessed night. Arise early tomorrow and hit the ground running again. So thanks so much.
We hope you really enjoyed the complete conversation between Bug Hall and Mark. Make sure you keep an eye on our YouTube channel for more interesting content. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel.